Back to the 2022 exit report series, nearing the home stretch, which makes some sense since we're talking San Francisco, and they neared the home stretch as well, finishing just one game away from making the Super Bowl, second consecutive year, just one step away. And here to share the stage with me is Sharp Clark, and this is exciting that we get to share this stage because you're like me. We do a lot of writing, we do a lot of self-analyzation, and now we get to network together. So how are you doing?
Doing well. I've been enjoying the weeks after the Super Bowl when I get to just catch up and review and analyze and tweak. And it's like a really exciting time to realize all the things I did wrong that I can do better moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Now you packed your site that you were at now for, what is it, 4for4.com, with a lot of written analysis, which is, right up my alley. I love that kind of stuff. How has that been for you as we head into analysis of yet another team here?
Well, it's nice not to have the pressure to actually write stuff publicly because I can focus, on writing the computer programs and tweaking the computer programs and analyzing the outcomes of, various tweaks to the algorithm. I like that a little better, but then it's going to prepare me to have more meaningful things to share publicly once we get closer to the next season and during the next season.
And what's exciting is we always get to learn. We always get to tweak. Even if it's a team that we nailed versus a team that we didn't nail, we're always learning some stuff. And we have to go back, like I usually go back, all the way to 12 months ago. And I think, to be honest, the better team lost in the NFC Championship game when the Rams overcame a 10-point deficit and beat San Francisco. What were your thoughts with San Francisco during and after that game?
I think the Rams' edge at quarterback was just enough to win the game. But, for reference, coming into this year, I did my analysis of every team, and I actually had the Rams and 49ers as basically identical coming into this season. So to the extent that reflects my view on the game the previous year, I think the Rams were playing at home, if I remember right. The Rams won the division.
Right.
So I would have given the edge before the game started to the Rams, but I think they were very fortunate to come away with that win. 2 straight years for the 49ers having tough playoff losses.
Yeah. So we see the offseason. San Francisco knows they're close. They know they have a good roster. They have one of the most exciting defensive ends in Bosa. They have quarterback decisions. And free agency in the draft, for me, it was quiet time. I didn't see anything exciting coming out of the draft, partly because they didn't have a number one pick due to Trey Lance. And free agency, kind of here nor there. What was your assessment of the roster as we went through the spring and summer?
I really liked the addition of Charvarius Ward. I felt like their defense was the year. So in 2021, I felt like their defense was a good secondary away from being an elite unit. Like various teams just kind of torched them deep. So I think Charvarius Ward provided that size and toughness in the secondary. And then getting some of those guys back from injury was really helpful too. And so I think I was optimistic about their relative lack of moves because I thought they were in a good place coming into the season outside of quarterback, obviously.
Yeah, that makes some sense. They weren't faced, luckily, with a lot of free agent defections. They like what they had. Would have liked to see them do a little bit more for the back seven personally, but that wasn't the case. So I'm going to read you my season keys that I put on my team sheets. We did this before when we analyzed Jacksonville, I think, where you were really ahead of the curve on. And I just kind of said, they look good, but I'm not ready to pull the trigger, which is probably going to be pretty close to what we talk about here. But so my first key, keeping Bosa healthy, because he makes players around him better. If you lose him, you lose 2 or 3 players if you don't have him. Second key, obviously, Trey Lance. We had a complete unknown, and we're going to talk about that because basically he had one meaningful game in 2 or 3 years. His college program was shut down in his last year in college because of COVID. So he came in the next year, his rookie year, he basically played, I think, 1 game, and then he's the anointed starter with Jimmy Garoppolo not even he's far removed from the practice field even during the preseason. And the third area, which points to what you said about the secondary, 68.3% allowed in 2021. Then you have Jimmy Ward, who's going to miss games 1 through 4. He was already on IR. Kind of the weak link of the team, and I was worried about that area. Those were my keys. Any comments on those or any other keys you were looking at?
Yeah, totally agree. And we saw the impact of Bosa being injured when he didn't play against Atlanta. And the 49ers had by far their worst game of the season and got rolled by an inferior team. And I mean, there were other guys out too, but Bosa made a huge difference in that one.
Yeah. So season win decisions, I'll let you go first. Did you have any, prior to week 1, did you have any future plays, season wins, divisional, anything?
Yeah, I played them to win the division at plus 190. Like I said, I was coming into the season, I was even between them and the Rams, and the divisional odds did not reflect. Not only did I think the teams were even in quality, the 49ers faced what I had projected as an easier schedule. So I was getting an evenly rated team against an easier schedule, and we all thought the Seahawks and Cardinals were kind of trash coming into the season, or at least I did. So for me, plus 190 on 49ers to win the division, even with the uncertainty of Trey Lance, was a good bet. I didn't want to play the season win total, even though my numbers said it was a good bet, because the uncertainty of Trey Lance created variance. And so I thought a plus 190 bet on the upside of this team was better than a minus 110 bet on the upside of this team. Because if I was wrong, if Trey Lance was an absolute liability and just derailed this entire season, I'm losing less money on a plus 190 bet than I am on a minus 110.
Yeah. So that's an excellent teaching moment for people who are watching this and listening to this. There's so many different ways to go at it. You don't have to go at season wins. The plus 190, you're risking less. It makes some sense. I had stronger opinions on Arizona being, well, maybe you had the same strong opinion on Arizona being weak, but I had a very strong opinion on the Rams being weak for something I laid out 5 or 6. So I saw more of a gap there, but I couldn't pull the trigger in advance. And what I did is I had a separate game plan. You may want to comment on this. It was kind of an off the wall discussion I had with somebody in the industry where I said, I think this is Trey Lance 1 step back, 2 steps forward. I'm going to wait 4 or 5 weeks, maybe get a better price, because I was all in on, of all teams, the Bears week 1 against the 49ers because of some situational pluses in that particular game. I thought we'd see the 49ers maybe not looking that good early, and then I could get a better price later on, because now Las Vegas, Chris and I talked about it during the year. You probably noticed it too. A lot of books offer revised season win totals as the year goes on. So I stayed on the sidelines, and I will agree with you on another point there. The schedule versus the Rams, far different. The Rams' uncommon opponents were much harder, including Buffalo. And I think San Francisco really had a nice pace to the season with only one set of back-to-back road games, Carolina and Atlanta, which didn't seem all that daunting then or now, but you did mention what happened with Bosa in Atlanta. So I kind of waited. I don't know if you pursued this any further during the season. Did you have any thoughts during the season of pulling the trigger?
I did. I was bullish on the 49ers all year. So I bet them the hour they traded for Christian McCaffrey, I bet them to win the NFC. I think it was plus 800, so 8-1.
Ooh.
And then I also bet at the time, and this is going to get painful as we get into this. I bet on the Chiefs to beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl at 30-1. This was the only type of this bet that I made all season, but I saw the Chiefs and I saw the 49ers, and I thought 30-1 is way too high of a price for these two teams to come out, and the Chiefs are a better team. So that was around week 8 or 9. And then I also bet on the 49ers again, I think before the playoffs started, to win the NFC. So I was heavily invested in 49ers futures.
I think what it is finding markets where you have a better ROI, a better edge than just a traditional market, betting a spread or betting a parlay or even betting a season win total or a division total. 49ers win the division was probably going to get cheaper, worse odds as it played out. So you hit, what's the right word for it? A market that's not in the mainstream before it got in the mainstream. And again, another good teaching point in terms of how to attack. And then you can always hedge and do some different things and see what's happening for a lower risk, higher return. So I definitely endorse that. And so my plan to wait 4 or 5 games to see what happened disintegrated right away, because Trey Lance, the guy who I thought would have a rocky start, he was gone after week 1. So I'm saying, okay, now I have to reassess this team with an experienced quarterback. Let's see what Jimmy G really, what he did. I don't know what he did other than stay away from the team in August, as if they were still trying to trade him at some point. And then he wins against Seattle week 2. And I'm saying live on air on our Tuesday show with Las Vegas Chris, can't wait anymore. So I took plus 150, not your plus 190, but I took plus 150 to win the division after week 2. I think the Rams were 1-1. I think almost everybody was 1-1 in the division at the time. But I like the experience of Jimmy G. When Lance went down, what were your thoughts at that moment?
I was actually, that improved the odds, in my opinion, that the 49ers would win the division, because, and that was always in the back of my mind, was I was like, okay, if Trey Lance is really bad, they still do have Jimmy G. So worst comes to worst, if this team started with Jimmy G, I would still like them to win the division. So for me, having a backup quarterback that you can rely on is a hidden edge in some of these futures markets. And this was definitely the case for the 49ers. So I was a little bit excited because Jimmy G is much more reliable.
Yeah. It really made me think, we're going to know how this plays out. We know Jimmy G's ceiling, but we also know his floor, and his floor was a decent floor considering the rest of the division and our opinions on the rest of the division. But we know it wasn't all smooth sailing, and there's a variety of reasons. They actually were 3-4 after game 7. And I don't know what's in the water in San Francisco, but maybe they need the new team trainer that the Chargers, just did something, because there were injuries all over the place on that team. They lost an offensive lineman. They had the defensive guys out. They were going through one running back after another. You mentioned the McCaffrey signing, which at the time, they said, oh, they're adding another running back. They're giving away 2 relatively mid-round picks. That seems fair. How is he going to be incorporated into the offense with Debo and whatever? And we saw you could never have enough weapons there. You made an astute move at this time. My thinking was a little different at this time, because at 3-4, I looked at the stat sheet, the stuff that I look at. And to me, it was, this isn't bad at all. They're actually playing above expectations if you look at the stat sheet. But they had a 24-14 sack ratio. McCaffrey was soon to have 2 weeks off because there was a bye week to incorporate him in the offense. In fact, I loved where that bye week was going to be. Look at the schedule. They didn't even have a road game until December after they signed McCaffrey, other than the neutral site game in Mexico City. So those kinds of factors, and probably a better turnover ratio than what they were showing at the time, -3. I admit I got really bullish on taking San Francisco for a number of weeks. I assume you were doing the same.
Yeah, I actually, one of my more controversial Twitter posts of the year was around this time. I posted my team ratings based on my grading, my effectiveness ratings, which is when I grade the games. And I had 49ers at number 2, I think, overall, or number 4 overall. And they were 4-4 at the time. And people were just not having it. Like, how can you possibly rank the 49ers this high? Like, what do you even, I'm unfollowing you because this is such a dumb take. And it was just what my ratings said. Like, I'm grading the games and they're performing at a high level. They just weren't finishing games, and they had so many key injuries. And a lot of these, if not all of these, were temporary. So watching Bosa come back, Trent Williams come back, the other defenders, they had 4 or 5 of the front 7 were out for a while. Watching them all come back and seeing how the level they were playing at just made me so optimistic about this team, combined with some schedule things that you were talking about, and a weakness overall in the rest of the division. I didn't really believe the Seahawks were good enough to actually finish the deal, and the Rams were completely falling apart, as were the Cardinals. It just, in a weak NFC, it just paved the way for what I thought was a very strong team to have a good run.
Yeah, you did a great job. I was bullish to a smaller degree for sure than you to make that bold statement. I was more concerned about, hey, Minnesota's not not a top five team, and San Francisco is, and I got a little pushback for that. But San Francisco was clearly developing into a top five unit at the particular time, and then I became on the sidelines again because Jimmy G goes down and Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, comes in. And I said, you know what? It turned out I had no more plays the rest of the regular season on San Francisco. I don't know how he's going to process this. I don't know how the turnover ratio is going to change. I didn't have the crystal ball on Brock Purdy. What did you have on Brock Purdy? Or was the rest of the defense just that good?
Yeah, I had nothing. It really cooled my appetite for betting on the 49ers. Luckily, I still had the futures, but I actually lost some money betting against Purdy because he had a few games where some errant throws really got fortunate not to get intercepted, and mistakes that he made were covered over. There was like a really bad sack he took, and they called roughing the passer and turned it into a first down. There was all these mistakes that rookies make that he kept getting away with, and so I sort of wanted to anticipate the regression that never really came.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit lukewarm on the 49ers with Purdy, but they, like you said, the defense really came through, and the skill players and the offensive scheme were just so good that I think Purdy was given my mindset shifted from, wow, this is going to regress into bad, to, wow, his natural early mistakes as a rookie were kind of smoothed over by situation, and that's built his confidence, and he's actually playing well. So once we got into the playoffs, I actually started to appreciate, okay, Purdy brings a few things that Jimmy G doesn't, and he's starting to play a little bit smarter, a little bit better because he's got these weeks of experience. So it took me a while, but I eventually came around on Purdy.
It's really interesting how person team fit is so important, and the Shanahan system really works. Not only does it work for running backs, you can probably insert me in there and I'll get a half a yard or something like that. Maybe not, because I'm afraid if one guy would hit me and I'd be cutting six. But and Purdy, just the way they scheme, the way they take those first 15, 20 plays and so on, it seemed to fit. In the playoffs, by the time it came to the playoffs, when I was assessing the entire picture of the playoffs, there was no way in my mind that it wasn't going to be either Philadelphia or San Francisco. The other five teams in the NFC seemed so far removed, including Minnesota and the Giants, Seattle, like you mentioned, and whoever else I'm leaving out, Dallas, which is so erratic, and Tampa Bay, which was kind of on fumes, in my opinion. We really had two teams. How did you it sounds like you got bullish again on San Francisco all the way through, and I know through the tweets and so on how excited you were about that San Francisco Philadelphia game, which on paper looked like it was going to be a great one.
Yeah, I was really excited about that game. I agree. I think the NFC was a two-team battle, and the right two teams were battling for it. I would have loved to have seen that game under different circumstances because I think it would have been a good one. I think it would have been a really, really interesting matchup, and I think we were robbed of a good game there.
Yeah. Their hands were tied. It was obvious. You talk about the value of a backup quarterback. What about the value of a backup to a backup to a backup quarterback?
Yeah. Josh Johnson was terrible even before he got concussed.
Yeah. So it was a shame. It was a really shame. I mean, we don't know how it would have played out, but we would have liked to have seen it. But we know San Francisco is right there again. But now we get it to the off season, and now we're to where we are now, and we're right back where we started with the Trey Lance experiment. Because from what I've read, I don't know what you've read, Brock Purdy may not be ready in September and may not be ready for a few weeks after that. We're right back to Trey Lance. So how do you handicap this year? Is it any different than last year? What are you looking at as you go through with San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback. I don't know how long the quarterback who starts week one will be their starter for. I really didn't. I still haven't seen anything from Trey Lance to give me a ton of confidence that he can really play at a high level. But if there's an offense built to, like we saw with Purdy, if there's an offense built to accommodate a young quarterback's mistakes and inexperienced quarterback's mistakes, it's this one. So I don't think that the quarterback decision is going to be as season defining as it is for some teams because of how well built the rest of the squad is. The thing that concerns me, or the reason why I might not be quite as bullish going into next season as I was at the end of this season, is that defensive metrics are very difficult to sustain year to year. It requires such a high level of play from every level. And, if they lose guys to free agency, if they lose guys to injury, there's just a lot of ways that a defense can be underwhelming compared to what it did. And in 2022, it was a real difference maker. And so they would have to continue at that high level in order to accommodate any QB weaknesses that they might face. And that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, we saw that in a few different teams. Crazy defensive coordinators becoming head coaches, Tampa Bay and New Orleans. We saw defensive numbers slide there and their offenses couldn't compensate. So it'd be interesting from San Francisco's point of view. Trey Lance is intriguing to me because he has a skill set to thrive in today's NFL, elusiveness, being able to run and so on. 15 of 31 week one. That's hardly a sample size that I want to pin my hat on, but I would be concerned. I wouldn't predict 68% for him like Jimmy G or some of the other quarterbacks that are driving the NFL these days. So my first thought, maybe talk about this, whether this has any meaning to you whatsoever, is that we're going to see lower scoring games early on with San Francisco as they get Trey Lance again indoctrinated into the system.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, they've played low-scoring games, I think, every time he's played. Maybe once his rookie year they had a high-scoring game, but yeah, for the most part, they're running the ball a lot. San Francisco wants to be an efficient passing offense built on explosive passing plays, but it does so by forcing defenses up to the line of scrimmage with an effective run game. And I think the thing that they'll miss with Trey Lance potentially is Jimmy G, and turns out Brock Purdy apparently are both really good at converting third downs and making the right throw, hanging in the pocket, and that's what I worry about with Trey Lance. So it might be a little bit more streaky and dependent on big plays, which like you said would lead to low scoring games because it's not going to be the methodical moving down the field and getting in the end zone kind of offense that I think we're used to with 49ers.
Yeah. Two staples with the 49ers over the years for me. Number one, I don't care who you plug in the run game's going to work. They're going to have run pass balance. Other teams, they lose one aspect or the other. San Francisco, you can count on to run the ball. And the other thing they do very well is control that line of scrimmage, that defensive front. At one point, they had 3 consecutive number 1 draft choices. They really value from the inside out approach to football. And then they've added all the speed, and they understand today's football, Shanahan and so on, with Debo and getting the shifty McCaffrey and all that. The pass defense still has to be fixed, in my opinion. And we have a new coordinator. Again, another new defensive coordinator because DeMeco Ryans, like his predecessor, became a head coach. Now, Ryans thrived, taking over. Do we expect the same with another new defensive coordinator?
Well, it's another factor that contributes to the uncertainty about defensive success sustaining from year to year, right? If it's they're going to try and run the same scheme and same concepts, like they might have some success, but anytime you have a change in coordinator like that, and when the defense played at such a high level, what are the odds that it goes up and gets better versus the odds that it becomes closer to the
not enough room.
Yeah. How much better can you get? I will say, going back to the Eagles game, they actually dominated the line of scrimmage on defense in that game. And I think this is a point that is glossed over because the entire focus is on what happened to the quarterbacks for the 49ers. But like the Eagles started with the ball. They had a really hard time running the ball. And they set up a 3rd and long, and then they blitzed, and Hurts made a kind of an off-balance throw that A.J. Brown caught with his fingertips off the tip, converted a 1st down. They got to another 3rd down, got to 4th down on 5, and then had that throw that to Devonta Smith that was incomplete, but they didn't challenge it, setting up a goal line touchdown, right? And then the next time they got the ball, 3 and out. The next time they got the ball, 3 and out. The next time they got the ball, 3 and out. I think one of those they might have had 1 first down, but no positive yards on the drive. It was on their 5th drive that they finally did anything on offense, the Eagles. And then by that point, you could see the deflation start to kick in for the 49ers. And then in the second half, there was defensive penalty after defensive penalty after defensive penalty, and it just everything fell apart. But while the game was in the balance, the 49ers defense dominated the best offensive line in football. And so if they can keep the core intact, then I think the defensive coordinator has something to work with for next year, whatever else they do. Because if you can win the line of scrimmage against a team like Philadelphia, then you can win the line of scrimmage against anybody.
I want to piggyback on your comment regarding their defense, because I think they forced Hurts into incredibly uncomfortable positions. They spied him. They didn't let him play his game. They made him throw from the pocket like no other team had. And when you can make a team one-dimensional and do something they don't like to do, even with the great wide receivers they had at Philadelphia, Philly, they weren't going to run the scoreboard on that in that game. That was going to be a tight game, probably decided by a turnover or two either way when the dust settled. So you're right. If what San Francisco did to scheme that, and we don't know if that was a personnel thing or a combination of personnel, defensive coordinator, and now they have a new person in the building. And he's a new person in the building, Steve Wilks, who's well regarded, but he has not been in San Francisco. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave you with this kind of, the division's not going to get any better in some respects. Seattle can build because they have a plethora of draft choices and just a lot of young talent. Arizona, to me, is on a downward cycle, and the Rams have never had continuity because they don't value draft picks. So does San Francisco still win the West? Wouldn't they still be the favorite?
Yeah, they should be the favorite, even with quarterback uncertainty. And I think what it means, practically speaking, is that assuming the Rams, I mean, I think there's some uncertainty around the Rams. Like, if they get the right pieces, they might be able to return to form somewhat. They dealt with a lot of injuries, but assuming the Rams don't step it up, then what the question is who's going to be playing quarterback in week 14, 15, 16, 17, 18? It almost doesn't really matter, like, how they start. If they can go 5-3, 4-4, they're probably on pace to win the division. I agree the Seahawks also could take a step forward, but beating out the 49ers for the division does seem like a tall task. And the Seahawks didn't do themselves a ton of favors coming second in the division this year, because now
that's true. They
have a second place schedule. And based on how the divisions are lining up, second place doesn't seem that much different from first place. So yeah, I do think it's not going to be a shoo-in, not going to be minus 500, but they should be considered, favorites to win the division, and the quarterback uncertainty won't do anything to change that. But as far as how far they go in the playoffs, it's going to depend on who's playing quarterback for them at the end of the year. And I have no idea who that is.
Unfair question for you now, but if the season win total was set at 10 and the divisional odds were set at minus 220, would you have any action?
It's tough to say because I haven't even looked at their schedule yet.
Put you on the spot. Yeah.
And then like off-season changes. Let's say no off-season changes. Let's say they don't draft anyone notable. They don't lose anyone. They don't gain anyone. Right. I would say over 10 would probably be under consideration.
Okay, that's fair enough. And we went into last season thinking, wow, the NFC West and the AFC West, they're just so dominant. There's going to be great. And then we didn't see that happening. The NFC West didn't do, they both had their ups and downs. It looks like the NFC West isn't going to be that great, but you never know. It could change. It could flip just as easily, come on, at the start of the year. But I'm looking forward to what San Francisco does. Another year of analyzing Trey Lance, and hopefully his skill set will be such that he will be able to grow and thrive. They traded a lot of draft capital to get him. So we'll see what happens there. Any closing thoughts you have here, or in general, in terms of what you're going to be doing moving forward?
No, I'm excited to see, you get the fresh start, all those futures that I lost in such devastating fashion in that game. I'm over it now, but especially because the Chiefs came through in the Super Bowl. But it'll be fun to start fresh and run my numbers analytically, objectively, no prior conviction on the team, and just see what they say and analyze the schedule and kind of go from there. Because I think it's important to start over every season in terms of evaluating the teams. While you incorporate everything you learned from the previous year, you have to come in with a neutral expectation. And I'm excited to do that for this team and see where I really view them now with nothing vested.
Yeah, absolutely incredible point there. Come in neutral. Don't have a preconceived bias on it. Take it and then make informed decisions based on your methodology and so on and so forth. Pleasure to share the stage with you again for another team. I hope our paths cross on future podcasts as we get ready for 2023. We could take a step back, take a little vacation, do some other things as we're going through our own data and stuff like that. And then we'll ramp it up again. So thanks again for coming on, and follow Sharp Clark. I know most people listening, watching are already doing that because your site just keeps coming up with great information. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me on.
See you next time.